Hi there and welcome to this video. It's great to see you all back, and there's a lot going on in the world of mirrorless cameras at the moment, with the launches from Canon of their R5 and R6, from Sony of their A7S Mark III, and of course the Nikon Z5. All of this action, raises a lot of discussions around the headlines, some negative, some positive. Sometimes though, it's the underlying technology, functionality or innovation that can be as interesting. And in this video we're going to touch on a subject that was hotly debated back at the launch a couple of years ago now of the Nikon Z6 and Z7, and that topic of dual card slots versus single card slots. Now at that time it spawned some discussion also of the reliability of different cards, because you can't just look at the functionality in isolation from the technology. And I thought it was a topic that would be worth revisiting and digging into a bit with these latest launches. So if I hang it off my journey through digital photography and videography, then my journey started with a camera that I found the other day, which is this Fujifilm FinePix 4700 Zoom. I got it around about 2004, and it's got the equivalent of a 2.4 megapixel sensor in it. Now in those days the card that it used was one of these, and it's a smart media card, very thin. It was about a millimeter thick. It's got some big contacts on it, and this is the one that came with the camera. It's 16 megabits. I think I got a 128 megabit one over time. But it wasn't the most robust of cards, but that didn't matter, because in those days I tended to transfer the images using the cable rather than taking it out and plugging it into a card reader. So the card stayed in the camera most of the time, and therefore actually bending it, because it was very thin, wasn't a problem and didn't affect the reliability. From there I went on to my first DSLR, digital DSLR, was the D70, the Nikon D70, and many of you started your journeys on that, and you'll know that in that there was a single compact flash card. These are about the same size as the memory card from the Fuji FinePix, but in a they've rotated by 90 degrees. They've got individual very small pinholes at one end where small pins went in. They're solid, they're a lot thicker, they're about 5mm thick for the Type 2 cards. And the capacity on these was between 2 megabits and 512 gigabits over time. The speed of them was denoted by, on here, the 800 times, and that signified you had to multiply the original audio CD transfer rate of 150 kilobits per second. So you multiplied 800 times that, and you got the transfer rate of that compact flash card, which would have been 120 megabits per second. So not a bad transfer rate. However, one of the challenges with the compact flash cards, as with all SSD technology, is they had limited erase write cycles, and that varied in those days between 500 cycles and 3000 cycles, and at the end of that individual blocks may start to degrade. Now this compact flash technology was quite robust, because, as I say, it was 5mm thick, so you couldn't bend it easily, but its Achilles heel was probably the use of very thin fine wire pins at one end, and those could quite easily get bent in camera. I never had a problem with that with my D70, and the compact flash continued through my use of the D200 and into my D800, where it was married up with a single compact flash card plus an SD card. And that was a step forward for me, because obviously the SD card that a lot of you will be using, it came out in 1999, is a little bit smaller. It's 32mm by 24mm, and it's only 2.1mm thick. So it's still quite robust. It is a step up from the compact flash, because it has got these interface contacts on the back for touch contacts there, rather than the very fine pins. Now with SD cards, you've obviously got to think about three different dimensions to them. You've got the capacity standards. So that was the original cards back in 1999 were SD cards. They then went to SDHC cards, which were up to 32 gigabytes in capacity. They then went to SDXC cards, which were up to 2 terabytes in capacity, and most recently you've got the SDUC standard, which goes from 2 terabytes to 128 terabytes of capacity on a card. In parallel with those capacity standards, you had to think about the bus type, the interface, and that went from version 1 up to version 8, and that allowed a greater bandwidth over time. And then you had this speed classification, and that starts to, you start to see the markings on the card. So you had C2, 4, 6 or 10, which denoted the megabits per second that could be transferred. You'll also see a UHS speed class, which is U1 is 10 megabits per second and U3 is 30 megabits per second, so increasingly important if you're doing video. And then you finally got a video speed classification, which is denoted by a V6 up to a V90. And that denotes a V6 would be 6 megabits per second transfer rate, a V90 would be 90 megabits per second. And then of course you also had the additional functionality that different manufacturers bought within the footprint of the card, such as Sony's Tough Card, which were more robust versions. So as I say, whereas the Achilles heel on the compact flash was those very fine pins that connected with the cards, the SD card has these touch contacts and connectors which are a bit more robust and a bit more reliable in camera. So from my D800 I moved to a D850 for about a year, and of course in the D850 you had a single XQD card and a single SD card to give you dual cards. So the XQD is again a rigid card, and it's based on the PCI Express version 2 interface, and V1 of that allowed up to 500 megabits per second transfer rate, and V2 up to 1 gigabit per second transfer rate. And here the contacts had the benefit of the compact flash in that they're enclosed, but it had the benefit of the SD card in that they are touch contacts rather than pin contacts. So you had an increase in robustness because of the hard nature and reliability because of the interface. And it's been a pretty reliable card from my experience. I haven't had any problems yet, touch wood. And you don't see too many people saying they've lost too much data off of the cards. So I think it has lived up to the reliability and robustness that people were talking about a couple of years ago when the Z6 and Z7 launched with their single card slots. So if we then step forward to the Z6 and Z7, we move to a single XQD card slot, as we know. However, with the Z6 and Z7, the card is also compatible with the latest technology, the CFexpress Type B size cards. Now, as I say, you know, the CFexpress comes in 3 sizes. Type B, which is the XQD compatible one, is a 2-lane interface, which is up to 2 gigabits per second transfer rate. You've got a smaller Type A, which is 1-lane interface, which is up to 1 gigabit per second. And you've got a Type C, which is larger and which has a 4-lane interface, which is up to 4 gigabits per second. So it's really aimed at that 8K video market. So that's the cards, the technologies, the interfaces. It's also interesting to look at how different manufacturers with different cameras have married that functionality, that technology, to different price points and different functionality. So if we start with the lower end of functionality, the Canon R6 and the Nikon Z5, then what we see here is that the manufacturers have put 2 UHS-2 SD cards into the bodies. Stepping up to the Canon R5, which is of course that 8K capable camera, what Canon have done is put a single CFexpress Type B card, so that's a 2 gigabit per second transfer, plus a UHS-2 SD card. And if you look at the Sony A7 Mark III, which is a 4K camera, they've married a single CFexpress Type A card, which is up to 1 gigabit per second, and a UHS-2 SD card there. So different approaches from different price points, different manufacturers and different functionality loadouts on the cameras. So we've got, the Z6, Z7 with a single XQD Type 4, which is a robust, reliable card, but perhaps requires you to use smaller cards, back up more frequently, and is less useful for genres like wedding photography where backup is really critical. We then step across to single or double UHS-2 SD cards, which are useful for 4K video capable cameras, or where you need that in-body backup capability. You then get to the asynchronous dual cards of either a Type A CFexpress card married with an SD card, which is suitable for 4K video, or a single Type B CFexpress card with an SD card, which is more suitable for 8K video, and that gives you that robustness plus some backup capability. But as always, it's really important not only to think about the technology, but to think about what is your use case. As I say, I survive with a single XQD card for doing 4K video and for the genres of stills I shoot. I tend to use smaller cards, so I don't go above a 64GB card, and I back up quite frequently. And therefore, in-body backup is less of an important piece of functionality for me. However, for some genres like wedding photography, having that in-body backup is critical, and that's the primary use case. However, don't forget that actually having dual card slots can use that functionality as an overflow for when one card fills up, you can continue shooting onto the second card. Or perhaps if you're shooting a hybrid of stills and video, you want the video to go to the XQD card and perhaps your stills to go to the SD card, so you create extra capacity by splitting the different formats. So as I say, it's more than just the functionality, the technology and the innovation. It's critical to think about your individual use case. So I hope you found this video useful. So it'd be great to hear in the comments below, what's your use case? What's the critical functionality for you? What are you looking for in new cameras as they come up in terms of the storage capability? How does it fit into your workflow? As always, I hope you found the video useful. If you did, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and it'd be great to see you on a future video.